Chris Paul said it all last season, and the Phoenix Suns are doing it again, stacking up wins, 2 big ones over the weekend, and at the center of both was Mikal Bridges. Quiet start to the season, but he is looking exactly like the menace we all know him to be. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, we'll break down his performance over the weekend and where the Suns are now. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 5 seasons, and a writer at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. Thank you all for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Tuesday morning. We are here on another game day, another nationally televised game, so welcome to Tuesday. You can find us on every platform, so hit follow or subscribe. Google, Spotify, YouTube, everywhere, Apple. And leave a comment below on YouTube letting me know what you think has been the key to Mikal Bridges' breakout. We talked about it all last year, even had a segment for it, the Bridges Breakout Watch, and yet here we are with an even bigger one so far for him. You can also follow along on Twitter at LockedOnPHXSuns. After every home game, we're doing our game takes in 7 words or less, so that will be there for all of us to have some fun with post-game. Joining us today to break down Mikal Bridges, to break down the Suns' offense overall, talk a little about where they stack up after the first week or 2 of this season is Damon Allred. He is a writer at Bright Side of the Sun and at SB Nation NBA. Damon, are you enjoying the Mikal Bridges breakout? Is it fully here? Where do you land on all this?
I'd say if I had to put it on a 1 to 10 right now, we're about an 8 out of 10 on the way there. We're really close. We're starting to see the star flashes. Now just got to put it all together and be more consistent with it.
It's been interesting to me how different it's looked for him. Just not taking a lot of threes early in the season. And I want to get into the bigger picture with the offense overall, but I think he was kind of at the short end of the stick a little bit early on while guys were figuring things out. Ayton's kind of being spoon-fed, and Cam Johnson is obviously an emphasis just being the new starter. You could look at it and kind of feel like, where exactly does Mikal fit in? He had 27 points against New Orleans on 13 shot attempts, only 7 shot attempts against Houston. So I guess that part of the trend continued, but he had 15 points, had a poster dunk, and he was being used in some new ways. So I want to get into his game. I also want to let everybody know today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to and faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. But Damon, you wrote about Mikal. Did you write about him twice? I know you were on Twitter posting about his Rockets performance, and you wrote about the Pelicans game. So what was different than we've seen in the past for people who are looking at the box score or are seeing some of these big highlight plays but aren't exactly sure why Mikal suddenly is changing or what he's doing is flashing so much more?
Yeah, so with the Pelicans game, the thing that really caught my eye was just I even mentioned it in the article, the way that some sequences felt like a takeover almost for Mikal, where he would get, a score on one end, a block on the other, and then an assist on the other. We remember that half-court bounce pass to Cam Johnson that was sick. That was part of one of those stretches. But, just the stretches in that game where it felt like the game was going to go how Mikal decides it. Things like that really make you think that he could end up being a star someday. And then with the Rockets game, the thing that just caught my eye that I wanted to go back and rewatch and talk about over Twitter, like you said, was just the short roll usage that they were getting out of him, playmaking for others out of that, and in some cases getting his own shot to be set up well. And he did both really well, And
that's for people familiar. We've been talking about it with Ayton for a long time. It's the same way that the Suns have been using Ayton more. With Bridges, they were even doing it as early as the end of the Dallas series. And I think it's really smart. Like, I feel like he's big. So, he is a threat at the basket. You can't just, let him get in there. I mean, anybody open going to the basket is going to be a threat, but he obviously, with his size, his ability to draw fouls when he does go to the basket, makes him a logical match. He's also a very aware person. Like, he is somebody that knows the right pass, knows the right shot to take. He's developing a handle that's helping him a little bit more. He can shoot. Like, the versatility, I think, is really where that threat makes a lot of sense. And you're seeing him diversify his game. You're seeing him without taking so many threes, without taking as many shots in general, to be able to have that impact. Like, I referenced it as the he's just going full Marion in a way. It doesn't look exactly the same, but that feels like what it is to me. Where do you think we see Bridges kind of continue to develop? Because that's part of what's been difficult for me to pinpoint watching him, Damon, is he's kind of doing a little bit of everything. One game, it's the short roll we were just talking about. One game, like the Pelicans, he's just getting a lot of sets run for him. Like, he's just kind of being used in the offense like he's Cam Johnson almost, getting these pin downs and curls and all this stuff to actually have plays run for him. So that's where I'm not saying that it's even a negative. It just makes it hard to pinpoint what happens next for him.
Yeah, so there are a couple points to that. Number one is, especially in the Rockets game, you could feel it coming out of the break at halftime. They wanted to get him more of those creation reps. They didn't do it as much going down the stretch in the first half, but then, like, within the first couple minutes of the third quarter, he's already getting 3 or 4 different looks as a ball handler and in the short roll. And so I think the volume is going to be the most important thing. And, like, it was so frustrating with the Rockets game. Coming off of the 27-point game against the Pelicans, he comes into the Houston game and only takes 7 shots and only 3 threes. And, it's kind of just disappointing after hoping to see more of those star flashes. You want to see him take over a game more. And, like, there's the 27 points on 15 or however many shots that it was in the Pelicans game. But, I kind of want to see a 30 points on 20 shots type of deal, really get those shots up.
I feel that. Yeah, I think that actually leads directly into where I want to go next, which is the overall offensive changes, because the more that I think about it, the more that I wonder if the story of the Suns on offense might be less about which one person becomes that, every single night consistent third option, and, more about who can plug that hole depending on what the defense is giving them. It's kind of similar to what we saw last year, although at the end of the day, that turned into the Chris Paul and Devin Booker show at the end of the playoffs anyway. I feel like we can talk about if there's a little more hope that it diversifies a little bit more this year in the postseason. But what I wanted to ask you to look even further, I mean, that was, I agree, reps, getting shots up, doing this stuff more often, the same types of things we've been saying about Ayton is pretty much all you can ask for, because he can do all of it. We know that. It's not about developing the skills. It's about honing them. Is what happens after, because you talked about in the article that you wrote, and we've all seen this comparison of, like, Kawhi Leonard, these players who are, pretty raw wings, who maybe are mostly just defenders, then maybe they become better shooters, then maybe they become creators, and then all of a sudden they're sort of superstar players. You say you're not fully convinced that he's that. I think it'd be crazy to say anybody's Kawhi Leonard. I feel like I've always leaned a little bit more toward, like, could he be Paul George? A little lower level, not quite the ball handler, not quite the shot creator, not quite the defender even. What do you see as his ultimate future? Because we are also talking, Damon, about a guy who's already 26 years old.
Yeah, so with the Paul George comparison, I think the biggest hurdle is just that ball handling hurdle, because, Paul George is maybe one of the 5 best ball handlers on the planet, or at least at his peak. I'm sure maybe now that conversation is more like top 10, 15, but, Mikal's just nowhere close to that. And he's, like, starting to reach a point where he's good for what his role is as a ball handler. and he's starting to have moments where he can go through traffic inside, even when there's, some like 2 or 3 defenders instead of just one that he's trying to drive through. And, I think it was in the second half of the Houston game, there was one play where Mikal goes up for a shot at the rim, and Alperen Şengün blocks it, but Mikal still finishes the shot. And it's just things like that where, you can see the strength starting to come. He looked way more swole coming into the year. We all saw it at Media Day. And, that's just a big thing that'll help boost his development. But the ball handling has to come with it,
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right. The ball handling is the biggest weak point. I think the other one is, just comfort driving to the basket. Those go hand in hand. I'm sure if he felt more comfortable dribbling, he'd feel more comfortable driving consistently, attacking, getting fouled, getting those layups. All of that has come along. I hear you on Paul George. I mean, he's 6'8", 6'9", so I think for what he is, his handle's really good. He's always been a pretty high turnover player, which is sort of what I was referring to in terms of he's never been a guy that's like the end-all, be-all offensive engine that is just pumping out assists. I mean, I know you don't have to get assists to be a good ball handler. I get that. But that's sort of where I was coming from of that feels like somewhat similar from a role standpoint to what Mikal could get to, where good enough, but not somebody who's your number one primary everything on offense at any point. Paul George has never really been that. Even his best seasons have been with Kawhi or Russell Westbrook or those Pacers teams that were pretty spread out. So I'm not sure if Mikal gets to any of that. Again, he's already 26. Like when Paul George was 26, he had already made 4 All-Star teams. When Kawhi Leonard was 26, he had made 2, and was actually already starting to have these injury problems. If that even sounds possible, he was about to win a title with Toronto when he was Mikal's age. So, he's already a little behind, but I think it's really fascinating. We'll continue to keep tabs on it. Let's talk about the offense overall, Damon, because I think you can't just talk about one guy without understanding that all of this is interconnected and this offense looks super, super different. So let's check in on that one more time. We've been doing it already throughout. But first, today's show, guys, brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates on the marketplace, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. We're hiring at my institute at ASU. The Locked On Podcast Network is always hiring. We use LinkedIn. It's easy to find people. It's easy to find people that have experience in the same industry, who know the same people in your network, who are going to be familiar with what you need and have the qualifications that you're going to want for that specific position. So put the purple hashtag hiring frame on your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Then use simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. Get your team in place and finish out the year strong. The right team member can be just the component you need to make that happen. And it's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So, Damon, the reason I did a whole episode last week on the offense changing. The reason I wanted to revisit it with you and just revisit it again overall is it feels like it's hard to get a handle. Like even one more game this year feels like suddenly you have different observations and takeaways about how this offense looked. And when I was reading your article or watching those games on Mikal by Mikal over the weekend, it was crazy. Just the shape of what was happening on the court and how different it suddenly looked. Like there were possessions where Mikal was getting scoring opportunities where he's running off the screen. It's Chris Paul or Mikal or Cameron Payne standing in the corner spacing the floor, and then it's Devin Booker running a pick and roll. And like it doesn't sound that different because a lot of the sets they're running are so similar. But if you had shown somebody that like midway through Chris Paul's first year here, it would have felt like, what on earth did they change so much for? But obviously we know it was needed. How have you just felt? Like, do you like this offense more when you're thinking about the playoffs? Do you feel like the changes feel like the ones that need to be made overall for the Suns offense?
I think the most important thing so far is just that they're trying so many different things and that multiplicity is really growing. I think it became sort of a meme at the time, but when Coach Bud back during that finals series with the Bucks was talking about, just playing random all the time. And I think that's something the Suns have really struggled to do offensively in the playoffs, at least. They kind of revert back to, one or two things out of their base offense, and they just get swallowed up after a while because these coaches are so good at making adjustments. Ty Lue in that Western Conference Finals series was so good at adjusting to how the Suns wanted to play. Jason Kidd in the Mavs series, and even Willie Green in the Pels series. Those are all really good adjusters. And I feel like the more multiplicities and the more options that the Suns have on offense, the better. And that's really what benefits the Suns most about Mikal's growth that we talked about. Is just that, at the end of the Rockets game, they were trying to go back to Mikal short roll possessions, but the Rockets were adjusting and closing up that opportunity. And so it just opened up the easier stuff, once again, like the Chris Paul and the Devin Booker stuff and the Cam Johnson in the corner stuff. All that stuff is opened more when things like Mikal on the short roll is going well.
Yeah, no, those are all really great points. I think I've really appreciated the optionality, and I think that's just a different way of saying what you're saying is, I think back to that Clippers game where, their counter to a lot of what the Clippers were doing, switching, once maybe the seals or switches in the post weren't there for Ayton and Landale, their kind of ultimate counter at the end of the game actually became some of their base sets, like just simple stuff to get Cam Johnson free in the corner, or, what they did against the Mavs late in the game, just running their double drag, but having Damian Lee be the guy. And it's like, once enough things are working, it actually really does simplify things. And so I was looking, and it feels like possessions are ending with fewer passes, but maybe that's just recency bias or small sample or whatever. The Suns, if people remember, were actually bottom 5 last year in passes per game. If I'm remembering right, yeah, they were third from the bottom behind the Bucks and the Hawks were 28 and 29. This year, they're about middle of the pack, but they're actually making about the same amount of passes per game, 4 more per game. There's just a lot more at the bottom this year so far. So I guess that doesn't fully explain it, but I guess I'm looking for a stat to illustrate some of the simplicity that we're talking about, because I do think, like, whether it's the randomness, that's something Memphis has embraced because Taylor Jenkins came from Bud's staff. They call it, like, Jenkins had a cool word for it when he first got hired. It was like random structure or something like that, which, like, that kind of just describes what you need to have in the playoffs. And so we're talking about 3-4 possessions, like that Bucks series. Every single Suns loss was a 10-point or fewer point loss, right? Like, we're not talking about wholesale changes. And I feel like that's sort of what's gotten lost with Suns fans sometimes, is like, we've harped so much on the offense, not having that third option, not having enough shot creation, not having maybe the bench creator that you want, et cetera. All these things we've sifted through, but it's like, you're talking about winning 4 or 5 more possessions in a big game. That's it, and I think they're more equipped to do that if they just add a little bit of these different loops and layers to what they're doing.
Yeah, that's 100% right. And I mean, it could even be something as simple as, more volume on Cam Johnson's shots, because, that was something back in those seasons that wasn't really working for the Suns as much. And you look at his game log from this season already, like, he's got 5 out of 6 games with at least 9 shot attempts, 5 of the 6 games with at least 6 3-point attempts. So he's really just chucking them up. And it's the sort of thing that you're wanting to see, because it does sort of signify that simplification of the game. If things are ending up with Cam Johnson taking a shot in the corner, things like that, then that's just a simple way to end a possession. It's not some complicated set,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, so to put a little bit of a bow, because I think part of what I was saying before, I don't think it's necessarily a coincidence that, I mean, literally, if you look at how they're using both players, it's not a coincidence that Mikal stepped up, had a big night the same time as Deandre Ayton got hurt, right? I mean, they're literally using Bridges as the roll man in the places where if Ayton was in the game, he would have been probably doing that. And just in terms of the sort of there's only one ball type of stuff. So I don't even want to say I'm worried about it, but that is part of what I wonder about, because we're talking about reps. We're talking about, just developing these things over time and just getting comfortable with them. I wonder if that was easier, or I think it was easier to do when Jay Crowder was in there, because you didn't have to worry about getting him shots. He was just going to take spot up threes, and that's pretty much it. Whereas now there's a whole extra person who you're trying to do that for. And I don't think you want to just turn Cameron Johnson into a spot up shooter or, a Duncan Robinson, because I think he can do more than that. So that's part of what I worry about is, are they going to be able to do this in a way where over the course of a full season, everybody's getting those opportunities to get comfortable with it? Because I think there will be nights where, again, Mikal takes 6 shots and we don't really hear much from him on offense in a given game because Ayton's scoring 30. And that's how the best teams operate, but the best teams operating that way, usually it's established players. Klay Thompson was fine with those Warriors teams. I can take 12 shots in a game because I know, I'll score 50 in a closeout game against the Thunder and I'll have my moment. Whereas these guys don't have that comfort. They're still figuring it out. So I worry a little bit about that, but it's sort of unknowable. I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I guess my only thought would just be that, the whole Deandre Ayton time with, the added opportunities for Mikal and Cam to have to use that time as best they can without, letting it go to waste and it becoming a Chris Paul gets 10 shots up in the fourth quarter type of thing.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, that's the other big elephant, obviously, is Chris Paul going to stay committed to this? Is he going to be – it's not even about his commitment, almost as his comfort, I think is a better way to say it, because you're asking an old dog to learn a bunch of new tricks, and it's just TBD. And it's we've kind of beaten that, I think, into the ground as Suns fans and people who talk about the team and whatnot, because it's just the biggest question is Monty going to revert to old habits? Is Chris Paul going to revert to old habits? Kind of did at the end of last year. Can things change? We'll see. But I think the reps part, you're right. It's the natural course of business in a season. Take the opportunities when they come. Just trust that it'll all pan out. And like I said, we're only talking about a few possessions per game. So very much on the right track and pretty impressive when you look up and the Suns are 3rd in offense and 5th in defense with everything that's been going on. So on that note, I want to talk a little bit to close the show out about the Suns being at the top of the Western Conference and the season that they've had just generally. Zoom out another layer. We were Mikal to the offense. Now we're offense to the team overall. So we'll do that after one more quick break. All right, Damon. So you and I were talking before the button went off to have us record talking, where you said – I said it was surprising that the Suns were at the top of the West, and you said to who, basically. And I think that's totally fair. They brought back a very similar team to what won them a lot of games last year. They didn't have any injury problems heading into the season. We know this team can win regular season games, but I do think the level of it, especially considering their record, I didn't necessarily think that they would fall off a cliff in terms of record. I didn't expect them to win 60 games, maybe somewhere between their over-under of 52.5 and where they were last year at 64 was where I was falling. But I did think they might start out slow. I did think the Kevin Durant stuff would linger, and roles and responsibilities and who's happy and who's not, that stuff would just take a little while to click. I didn't think it wouldn't click, but I thought it would be a little bit of an adjustment period, and that hasn't happened at all. They're 5-1. They have the second best net rating in the NBA. It's them, Cleveland, and Milwaukee, and then a big gap to New Orleans. They're top 5 in both offense and defense. They've just been a monster again, but you don't sound surprised. So tell me why.
Well, for number one, they won 64 games last year, and it's more or less the same team, and we come into the year with, over-unders being set around like 52-ish, and I'm just sitting there like, you really think that a team that's mostly the same is going to drop 12 games just because of like this weird Ayton thing that happened and this weird Durant thing that happened, all of which seems to be water under the bridge at this point. And
They also lost a rotation player, to be fair. They
yeah,
just have one less player. That sucks.
Which could be rectified soon, to be fair. And we still have no idea a timetable on that. Before the season, Monty said he wanted it over and done with by opening night. That obviously didn't happen. It could linger to the trade deadline at this point. I think that middle of December date where a lot of players become available might be a date to look at for James Jones and anyone monitoring the situation. But right now it's still unresolved. But I also think that just, I saw someone tweet it out the other night. It might have been Robbie Calland, who is involved with you somehow, I think. He said, the regular season Suns are the regular season Suns again. And so I just don't think that should really come as a surprise to anyone. They know how to win regular season games. They got some key improvements from some key young guys. And I just don't think that this should come as a shock, really.
How did you, or where did you have their win total? Like, did you make a prediction either publicly or in your brain about what their actual win total would be? Because I agree, the over-under was kind of ridiculous, but 64 would have been high too. So where did you land?
I think I had it around 55, 56.
I guess where I'm, that's about, I think I said 54 on the podcast. And I totally agree. None of those things are surprising. And it's kind of funny to say the regular season Suns are back. The regular season Suns never actually went anywhere. The last time we saw them in the regular season, they kicked butt. They're doing that again. It was the playoff Suns that made everybody freak out, and the off-season Suns. But what I think I would say surprised me is if you were to tell me that not to overstate the difficulty of the record of the schedule, because I know New Orleans was weakened and then the Rockets aren't exactly a tough team to play. But to start with the slate that they did, and then have the bench actually contribute. Like if you had told me they went 5-1, obviously I could imagine a world where that happens, but it probably wouldn't have included feeling pretty confident about the progress of some of these other offensive options and the bench actually being a contributing force. Like if you told me they start 5-1, like right when Jay Crowder left the team, I probably would have said, okay, Book just went crazy for 2 weeks. And that kind of has happened, but not like 40, 50-point games, just sort of normal, 10%, 15, 20% better Book. And then all these other things have gone really right as well. That's part of, I guess, where I'm surprised if I had to pick something. But I agree with you. I mean, other people are probably more surprised than Suns fans are. But it's still something that they are back to just churning out, as I said at the top of the show, just piling up wins again, like Chris Paul kept saying last year. They're going to be headed for a 1 seed. That's I don't think a lot of people thought. I think a lot of people were expecting 3-4, but if they keep on this pace, they're going to be right in the mix. I mean, I know it's only a few games in, but they're headed there.
Yeah, I think the only two things that really surprised me about this start are the fact that they did it against the schedule that they did with, matchups against the Warriors, Clippers, Mavericks, Blazers, who look really good right now, but that was their one loss so far. And then the other thing is just Damian and Lee and Jock Landale both looking like legit rotation players that could maybe go the rest of the regular season that way. None of the stuff they're doing out there looks that unsustainable. I mean, except for Lee's game winner against the Mavericks. Don't know how many times we'll see that, but just those guys looking like legit players is kind of the only shock that's come to me. I thought they would maybe be end of the bench, third unit type guys, but they've really impressed me.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing. Like Jock being good is somewhat surprising. Dario not playing at all is another level of surprise. Like, again, if you had asked
even last night.
Yeah, exactly. Even with Ayton out, to still not be playing is a surprise. And if you had told me the bench was going to be something positive, I would have probably guessed, okay, Dario is back, and that's
he's got the key in unlocking
campaign. Exactly. I will say, you said nothing's unsustainable. except for the Damian Lee game winner. I think I still like, if there's anything I want to see for a full season aside from Chris Paul being comfortable with that kind of backseat, I think the other thing is like Cam Payne being a positive as much as he has been, especially when you look and he's only shooting 43%, and the numbers on offense are basically the same. Being such a difference maker on defense and not being a negative on offense, I'll wait to see if that continues. I don't think that's been the main driver of them winning games, obviously, but it did hurt them at points last year. So we'll see. I want to ask you, though, the Western Conference, I actually don't even have the standings up. I have the net rating rankings up.
And what's the difference, really?
The difference is there's a bunch of Eastern Conference teams in my way of seeing who is so the Nuggets are 4-3, the Warriors are 3-4, the Mavs are 3-3, the Clippers are 2-4. Those are probably the other teams outside of Memphis, who's 4-2, that most people probably would have said would be competing with the Suns for a top seed. And then you have the Blazers up top. Pelicans have impressed. Obviously, the Spurs and Jazz, I think we can all agree, are gonna drop down. But
you don't believe in Larry?
I actually do believe in Lauri Markkanen. It's some of the other stuff that I believe in less. And yeah, I don't quite think Lauri's going to be the driving engine of a number 4 seed in the Western Conference. I saw somebody, this was a crazy tweet that was going around, that some Jazz fan was complaining to one of their beat writers that Markkanen had done more this year so far than Gordon Hayward ever did in a season for the Jazz. Just
I love
awful. You play your whole, 10 years of your career with a team, and then they just decide you did absolutely nothing, and Lauri Markkanen is better than you. But anyway, what Western Conference teams, we're early. It could be literally all of them. The standings could end up exactly how we thought. But which of these slow starts in the West do you think is real between the Nuggets, the Clippers, the Warriors, and the Mavs? Because that's 4 teams that are at or below 500 that we thought were going to be like dominant, great teams.
So if the goal is to pick one that's going to stay bad or stay at least away from the top, I think it has to be the Clippers, just because of all the weirdness going around with Kawhi still. Even so long removed from the injury, when it seemed like he was close to coming back in the playoffs, and now he's coming off the bench and he's skipping back-to-backs and things like that. And I worry about hate to be the Suns' worst enemy, but I don't like the vibes in the Clippers organization right now.
It's not great. I think Eddie Johnson was actually talking about them in the media room before a game the other day, and it wasn't anything super private, so I'll just say what he was saying about the Clippers, which is that they almost have too many good players in their own way too. Like, the injury stuff obviously is the number one storyline for them, but the depth, you would think, and Ty Lue spoke to this week, you would think it would be plug and play, but what he said is it's actually harder to plan for this year because every day he wakes up not knowing if Kawhi is going to be available. And PG, I think, has just been sick, but with Kawhi, it's just a mystery. Whereas last year, it's like, all right, we don't have Kawhi. What's our rotation look like? Who's stepping up? What's the structure going to be? And then filling in for him, there's always going to be like 2 or 3 really good players who just don't play. Like when the Suns played them, Terrence Mann got like 6 minutes. That's a guy that was huge in that Western Conference Finals push that they made. He was huge against the Suns in that Western Conference Finals. So I tend to agree. I thought you might have a different answer, but I mean, we're picking between the 2 teams that made the West Finals last year, the Nuggets, who have a back-to-back MVP, and then the Clippers. So I guess if you're betting, that's the smart pick, would be to say that the Clippers are the one that stay down there. I'm a little interested in the Warriors. What? Go ahead.
I was going to say, just real quick, speaking of the Nuggets, I saw already that Jokic's plus-minus or on-off ratio right now is like plus 30 again. So maybe lining up for a 3rd MVP in a row.
I think once Jamal Murray gets right, that team's going to click, because it actually seems like trying to get him integrated has been the one thing that makes them look bad. Like the games he hasn't played, they've looked like the normal Nuggets. When he has played, I think they might have won 1 game when he's played, but you can tell it's so concerted and they don't feel comfortable. And so that might be it for them. And then the Mavs have an incredible point differential per game. They're plus 7.3 a night, but for whatever reason, they're just losing. And so that one shouldn't be too big of a problem. And so, yeah, the Warriors, I will say, they're at minus 3.3 per game right now, which would put them outside of the top 8 in the West of that metric. And their record's only 3-4. I think if they don't get an amazing Draymond season or an amazing Klay season, you're asking a lot of the rest of those young guys. Not to say they won't get those things, but Draymond's been hit or miss. Klay's obviously coming back from the injury. Who knows if Wiggins will be as good? Like, you start to get a little rickety when you start to take things away from them, but I'm not going to bet against them. I think I had them in the final. So, but either way, the Suns will be right there. I mean, I thought they would be a top 4 seed. I don't see a way that they're not.
Yeah, not to get all Bill Simmonsy, but I think the Warriors still have a trade to make, whether it's through Draymond or otherwise, but I think that they're still going to make a big move, and it could be, parlaying those young guys into like a bigger piece that they can really bank on. But yeah, I don't think the Warriors are a finished product roster-wise.
Well, and even if they don't make a trade, those guys are going to probably look a lot better. So it's kind of guessing too. Even if you said Klay and Draymond aren't, elite, you suddenly Moses Moody's like awesome by the end of the year. So
he's already had some really good defensive moments this season too. Moody has.
Yeah.
So
their guys are really fun. I'm looking forward to the November 16th rematch between these two teams. But that'll do it for today's show, guys. The Suns are picking up where they left off. Mikal Bridges looks awesome, and we're just here to keep it rolling. You can read Damon at Bright Side of the Sun. The Mikal article we talked extensively about today is up there. You can read his work at SB Nation NBA, covering the league more broadly. And we will be back post-game tomorrow night after the Minnesota game. And then Aaron Edwards will be here on Thursday. So that'll be the schedule for the rest of the week. Keep it right here. Hit follow, hit subscribe. Do not miss a show. And in the meantime, go listen to Locked On Sports Today. Make that your second listen to get caught up on everything else going on around the world of sports.